firefights, hillbilly armor, stolen weapons. This is the untold story of the gun trucks of the Vietnam War.
The Army didn't build them. We did.
18-year-old soldiers turned standard-issue trucks into 5-ton machines of destruction.
Drive that truck through the gates of hell and it'd bring them back.
This is the lost history of one of America's fiercest fighting units.
The enemy called the gun trucks the breath of the dragon.
These are the men who served, the trucks they built, and the battles they endured.
They played a vital part as much as the foot soldier, artillery, airplanes, helicopters.
These gun truck soldiers changed the war in Vietnam, and their legacy continues to save lives in Iraq and Afghanistan.
We are their living legacy. They taught us what we needed to know.
Never broadcast before 8mm film, shot by the men themselves, reveals this incredible story for the first time. The Vietnam War launches many new weapons of destruction. Today, most of these weapons are the stuff of legend, from M16 rifles to the Huey helicopters that became an iconic symbol of the war. But there is one weapon created during the Vietnam War that had been lost to history until now: the gun truck. These 8mm films, shot by soldiers, reveal the hidden story of gun trucks.
Gun trucks just became a rolling combat unit. Nighttime, daytime, wherever you was needed, that's where you went.
Gun trucks are heavily armed vehicles designed to defend vital supply convoys from enemy attack.
The role of gun trucks in Vietnam was to protect their convoy, put theirself in harm's way, and take the heat off the cargo trucks.
Guns had been put on jeeps and trucks since World War I, but the Vietnam War demands a new breed of fighting machine. More ammo, more armor, more deadly. This is the untold story of the U.S. Army's gun trucks in Vietnam, highlighted by never-before broadcast footage shot by the soldiers themselves.
You're talking about a 19-year-old kid making life and death decisions.
I was drafted, never was out of the state of Ohio.
One of my biggest fears was having to drink powdered milk while I was in Vietnam, because I was a huge milk drinker at that time.
I didn't know how to drive a truck. I couldn't shift gears.
You grow up really quick. You grow up quick and you better listen.
War rages in Vietnam, starting in 1955, as North and South clash over ideologies. The U.S. joins the fight in 1965 and, allied with South Vietnam, battles against two factions: North Vietnam's regular army and a guerrilla army known as the Viet Cong, or VC. Nina Collars is a PhD and professor at Franklin and Marshall College who specializes in tracking the technological and tactical innovation of U.S. soldiers under fire.
VC operatives this was their territory. This is their land. This is their wheelhouse. They know how this territory is laid out and how to move within it smoothly.
The U.S. brings a key military advantage: air power. The newly created Air Cavalry is the heart of that air power, transporting men and machines to battlefields and providing air support from above. The North Vietnamese need to neutralize this advantage. They look for a weakness. Richard Kilblane is a U.S. Army veteran and a leading gun truck historian and author.
The weakness of the Air Cav is the fact that that division is entirely dependent on truck drivers for everything it needs to fight: fuel, ammunition, and so the enemy realizes the soft underbelly is those trucks.
Everything they ate, shot, drank, came from us.
North Vietnamese soldiers see the destruction of these convoys as their opportunity to ground the Air Cavalry. The U.S. Air Cavalry is about to learn just how vulnerable they are. September 2nd, 1967. 37 cargo trucks filled with aviation fuel head out on the road from Pleiku to Anke. Striking without warning, the enemy disables the lead truck, trapping the rest of the convoy in its kill zone. The enemy launches a deadly combination of AK-47 fire, mines, and rocket-propelled grenades, decimating the supply convoy.
In 10 minutes, the enemy had damaged or destroyed about 31 of those vehicles, killed 7 drivers, and wounded 17.
For the first time in U.S. military history, truck drivers are a main enemy target. War has changed. A new weapon of war emerges from tragedy and necessity. A weapon that is built not by the Pentagon, but by 18 and 19-year-old kids trying to keep themselves and their buddies alive. The gun truck. The original gun trucks are 2.5-ton vehicles.
When they started building the gun trucks, the most readily available materials would be 2x6s, 2x8s, and sandbags. When it rains, sandbags get real heavy.
Dave Kirsten is the president of the Military Veterans Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
They were a mechanical breakdown nightmare, breaking axles, breaking springs.
Within months, the 2.5-ton trucks are replaced with 5-ton vehicles, sandbags and wood replaced by steel. The main difference between cargo trucks and the new gun trucks is the gun box, an open area on the back of the truck where the new weaponry is mounted. The non-commissioned officer in charge, or NCOIC, decides what goes into the gun box. Soldiers typically build 2-layered walls of armor around the gun box to protect themselves and their weapons. One of those weapons is the M60, nicknamed the Pig due to its bulky appearance. M60s are the only machine guns the Army authorizes to be used on gun trucks.
The M60 machine guns would sweep low. We could practically shoot our own tires out.
But gun truck crews know that the fight that lay ahead of them requires something more powerful. Like the M2 Browning machine gun, otherwise known as the 50 or Ma Deuce, which was used extensively during World War II and Korea.
If a VC was hiding behind a tree and we had an M60, we could pepper the tree and hope he'd step out sooner or later and hit him. With a M2 50 caliber machine gun, we simply cut the tree down.
There is one weapon every gun truck soldier wants on his truck: an M134 minigun. The minigun is an electric-powered rotating barrel Gatling-style machine gun built for helicopters and planes. Its multiple barrels allow it a potential per-minute firing rate more than 10 times the M60 or 50.
Yeah, the minigun, really awesome. That thing is, it'll light you up, man.
50 caliber, that's an awesome weapon. Boom, 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 boom. But a minigun, that's special right there.
The Army won't give them the weapons they want, so the crews get creative.
We scrounged, traded, stole, begged, borrowed.
You know, we stole stuff all the time. I mean, that ain't no war story. I mean, we stole miniguns.
The best way to describe a gun truck in Vietnam is a man's love affair with a truck, machine guns, and then give him a paintbrush.
Innovative gun truck soldiers transform standard issue vehicles into heavily armored weapons of war. Now, the trucks need a badass look to match. They paint their trucks jet black, saying goodbye to the Army's standard issue green.
Intimidation. That was a lot why they started painting them black, was just to intimidate, just make them stand out.
The final touch in the evolution of a truck into a weapon of war is its name.
And you know, they painted them with these bright collars and they put these big names, these big bold names, the Ace of Spades and Brutus and King Kong. They're like gunslingers, Old West gunslingers, and they're out rolling up and down the road in Vietnam and they're kicking people's asses, you know what I mean, and they're not taking even names.
Steve Calibro is the builder and commander of one of the most famous gun trucks from the Vietnam War.
I picked out a name for it, and it was from a song that I heard before I went to Vietnam, and it was basically an anti-war song, I guess, is what I'm told now, which I didn't know at the time, but it was the song of Eve of Destruction by Barry McGuire. and the Eve of Destruction was born.
The Eve of Destruction utilizes twin 50s in its initial design. They are mounted at the rear of the gun box. Twin 50s, as the name suggests, are two 50s side by side that fire simultaneously. Nearly every gun truck is destroyed or left behind in Vietnam, except the Eve of Destruction, now proudly displayed at Fort Eustis, Virginia. New generations of American soldiers study the role of gun trucks as part of their training.
When we go through our basic officer course, part of it is going through the Transportation Museum, seeing the Eve of Destruction on display in Fort Eustis.
3,000 miles away from Eve of Destruction's final resting place, its creator travels to the location from which he deployed to Vietnam almost 50 years ago. Steve Calibro has been invited to see today's fighting trucks by the new generation of his former unit.
Steve is absolutely a living legend of the 523rd Truck Company. The Eve of Destruction and the gun trucks in Vietnam were the prototypes. That was the first truck built that later evolved into what we have today.
That gun truck was 523rd's pride gun truck. That was the only gun truck for that year that had twin 50s. I put those in it. They borrowed the twin 50s from a Navy ship when they weren't looking.
Technically borrowing it, yeah.
And I think it's really important for the soldiers to understand that they're part of something larger than themselves, and they're part of a very impressive lineage. We moved into a brand new building, and the first things to go up on the walls were pictures of the Vietnam-era gun trucks from the 523rd.
50 years after Vietnam, this new generation of gun truck soldiers faces a similar fight in today's Middle East war zones. In the early days of the war in Iraq, gun truck crews are being decimated by an enemy determined to cripple the U.S. war effort. Week after week, month after month, American casualties rise, until one gun truck soldier determines to put a stop to it.
I heard you guys really kick some ass over there, and we want to do the same thing.
Larry Fayant is a Vietnam War veteran. At the age of 20, Larry is assigned to the 523rd Transportation Unit out of Fort Lewis, Washington. Fayant is reporting in as Steve Calibro, the builder of the Eve of Destruction, is shipping out of the same unit. Now, Larry is on his way to see the man who he helped to survive, not in Vietnam, but in the deserts of Iraq. It is a reunion long overdue.
I volunteered for Vietnam. I was asked if I wanted to drive a gun truck, and I took him up on that. Most of these people on gun trucks knew they could drive that truck through the gates of hell and it'd bring them back.
In 1970, Larry Fayant had no idea that his service in Vietnam would save the lives of a whole new generation of gun truckers almost 40 years later. Fayant is at the home of James McCormick. The two haven't seen each other in almost 10 years.
How you doing, man?
Oh, man, you look so good. Look at you.
You ain't changed a bit.
Well, come on in. Come on in. My goodness gracious. Michigan's a long way from West Virginia.
It is.
James McCormick is one of the most highly decorated soldiers from our wars in Iraq. He earned 3 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars, and the Distinguished Silver Star during his 2 tours of combat duty. McCormick, like Fayant, is a gun trucker.
This is my family.
Beautiful family. How old's Preston?
7.
I think that's just about the last time we were together.
That's right. And look at the little guy right here.
The supply convoys McCormick defended in Iraq are as vulnerable as those Fayant defended in Vietnam. And the gun trucks protecting the convoys, similarly underarmed.
We started to get hit, and you had transportation folks that were in theater said, you know, we're losing too many trucks, we're losing too much cargo.
A deadly history is repeating itself.
Vietnam was the war that we didn't want to talk about. And of course, there we were again in Iraq, fighting that kind of intervention. And so we had to go back and open those books again. And so when given an opportunity to leave Vietnam, the military structures took that opportunity to forget everything we'd learned as a way to deal with the fact that it was an unloved intervention. An unfortunate side effect of not loving an intervention is that you try and forget all the lessons you learned as fast as possible.
McCormick knows it is adapt or die, and he looks to history for an answer.
They were giving us a mission that, required us to go toe-to-toe with the enemy. I wanted the tools to do it right.
I got an email from Lieutenant James McCormick, and I said, well, hey, you need to be talking to the Vietnam vets.
Richard Kilblane connects McCormick with Fiant.
Do you remember the first time that we talked overseas? I believe that the words that I used was, I hear that you're one of those gun truckers over from Vietnam, and I said, and I heard you guys really kick some ass over there, and we want to do the same thing. Let's talk tactics.
And he was wanting to know this and that, and we just talked gun trucking. The crews in Iraq were starting to build gun trucks, but there was no standard. You would take armor off Russian equipment that was left.
The soldiers in Iraq develop new strategies and borrow others, including the Vietnam-era tactic of turn, fix, and fire. This tactic requires a gun truck to pull to the side of the road, turn into the enemy fire, and destroy.
Turn, fix, and fire became a tactic that I started to see in some historical documents from the Vietnam gun trucks. So I sat down and I started writing, how to react to an ambush. You understood that we were suffering from a lack of armor. That's whenever you guys really became involved in this fight. It was like you were back at war with us. It was like you were the mentors that we needed.
This generational collaboration aids in the creation of a new piece of military technology, the Hunter Box, an armored barrier that protects the soldiers and weapons in the back of the gun truck.
The Hunter Box was big chunks of steel that stopped everything.
If we'd have had that box in Vietnam, there'd be a lot more of us here.
Larry Fiant is more than a consultant. After helping with the design, the Vietnam vet helps McCormick acquire 3 Hunter boxes from the manufacturer and sends them to gun truck units in Iraq.
And this box, we turned into a rolling death and destruction. Nothing penetrated that box.
That was a good box.
And Larry, all of those things that you guys told us about, what you went through in Vietnam, we applied every bit of that. We took that to heart.
James McCormick is a great example of some of the really beautiful intergenerational learning that can happen with an eye toward history, with an eye toward all the experiences of Vietnam.
For me, being here with you now and knowing you all these years and affectionately referring you to as old Dad,
I'm honored.
I love you, man. And I love you guys for what you've done then and what you did. We would have lost a lot of people. Larry has been that one that I could call on the phone and talk to him. That relationship's very special, I love him. I mean, there's no other way I can say that. I love him.
Soldiers in Iraq benefit from lessons learned in Vietnam. But in 1969, gun truck crews in the heat of battle are facing a trial by fire. June 9th, 1969, the 359th Transportation Division is tasked with escorting huge tankers full of highly flammable helicopter fuel across Vietnam from Quy Nhon to the helicopter base in Pleiku. This is the same road traveled during the massive ambush of September 1967. Without the fuel, the American offensive will fail. 2 gun trucks, Brutus and the Misfits, are protecting 30 fuel tankers transporting 5,000 gallons of fuel on the dangerous journey. Roger Blink is the gunner on Little Brutus, an armored Jeep leading the convoy. It has a mounted M60 on the back.
I rode on the gun Jeep, sitting on the armor. Just a typical day, the convoy was huge.
The convoy passes the guard compound at the base of the An Khe Pass. The area is considered a safe zone. The North Vietnamese Army has not launched any convoy attacks here.
And there were certain areas you kind of felt safe in. The Korean division controlled that area, and Koreans were ruthless against the communists. The enemy looked for patterns, looked for places where we tended to drop our guard.
And on this day, the safe zone turns out to be anything but.
I never saw a clue that it was going to happen like that.
It begins when Merton Barrowcliff, Brutus's .50 caliber gunner, suddenly sees a rocket-propelled grenade headed his way.
I looked up and seen the RPGs coming at us from beside a tree out by the little knob of a hill they had there. They went over the truck and exploded. They missed the truck by about 6 foot.
Brutus is in the kill zone, and its crew radios for backup.
I told Prescott to get off the radio and get on the gun.
Prescott turns, fixes, and fires.
So he fired around 6,000 rounds of ammo, and I fired probably 2,000.
Then all hell broke loose right there. We're just laying back a lot of fire back towards the enemy, and you can see him out running around out there. And then, boom.
At that moment, 3 rocket-propelled grenades hit the misfits simultaneously.
One was right under the driver, and it didn't explode. Lucky for him. And then the other 2 did, and it blew us out of the truck. Got hit by 3. All at one time. I was out there for, I don't know how long. It could have been an hour, could have been 5 minutes.
Hish regains consciousness to find himself surrounded by the enemy.
I remember seeing him running right by me, thinking I was dead. I just froze, didn't breathe, didn't do nothing, and just hoped they didn't see me alive.
In the chaos of the ambush, Hish's truck, the Misfits, heads out of the kill zone. Moments later, Brutus follows, leaving behind Hish, who is in and out of consciousness in a ditch. Fortunately, the crew of a cargo truck that follows notices the injured soldier.
As the truck went by, he slammed his brakes on, and they weren't totally sure what I was, because just covered with blood and everything. Then he jumped out and he put me in his truck and took off.
Hish earns a Purple Heart for his service. He leaves Vietnam in 1969, but his experiences will always remain.
I remember it every day. It's there, something that's there, it never goes away.
In the summer of 1969, the North Vietnamese escalate their attacks and change their tactics against the gun trucks and their vital convoys. The enemy is evolving, but a new U.S. South Vietnamese offensive gears up to return the favor. The plan is to strike at the heart of the North Vietnamese by destroying the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a key supply route. A gun truck and a convoy commander will find themselves with the enemy closing in, and their only possible rescue miles away. A fateful decision that day still resonates today. The serene, snow-covered farmland of central Indiana is disrupted by a war wagon from another era, the replica gun truck, Ace of Spades. .50 caliber machine guns cover the left and right flanks, and dual .50s protect the rear of this 5-ton monster. Sammy C. and his fellow gun truckers, Danny Cochran and Robbie Robertson, are arriving at the home of their former commanding officer, Lieutenant Jim Baird. Baird now serves as an Indiana state representative.
Hey, Sammy, what are you doing, buddy? Gonna go for a ride in the gun truck? You bet I do.
I left Vietnam January 30th, 1972. But I didn't want to leave my buddies. I didn't want to leave that truck.
Sammy C. built the replica of the Ace of Spades in 2003.
For years, I thought about it after I left them over there. Maybe I should build the truck. But why? And I would say this, I built it in memory of those who served.
You don't use ladders, you jump over the front. Yeah, you know the drill.
Smart ass. Good to see you, buddy.
Looking good.
Looks
Looking good.
like on time, doesn't it?
Yep. Assume your position, LT.
Here we go.
On the road again.
God, this bring back memories, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Hear that old truck? Doesn't that sound good?
Wind her up. Smell that diesel.
These old babies here were so reliable. I mean, you could put out lead. How long did it take you guys to change a barrel? Just spin a barrel out?
Not but
Well, you know, 7 seconds, 5 seconds.
Not much. You knew how many clicks just by feel,
Yeah.
you know. We already had them in, done fired them.
Yeah.
Put tape on it, marked the clicks.
Yeah.
We're ready to go. I think I'm getting turned purple. Yeah, I remember riding around with no shirt on with a good tan. Now, you know, I don't know what's going on with it.
Damn, that'll win raw.
Yeah.
48 years earlier, in the fall of 1969, Jim Baird is studying for his master's degree at Purdue University in Indiana.
I was at Purdue. I've been married a year. They gave me a 120-day delay to finish up my degree.
Baird, with his wife and baby girl, travels to Fort Benning, Georgia, to enroll in officer candidate school. He graduates at the top of his class and receives orders to deploy to Vietnam. Baird is assigned to the 523rd Transportation Company.
They put us infantry officers to help run the convoys. You knew that 24/7 somebody was trying to kill you. And the only way to survive was through camaraderie like you ended up with on the gun truck. When they talk about having your back, they mean having your back.
In 1971, the South Vietnamese Army, known as the ARVN, and the U.S. military initiate a new offensive against the North Vietnamese. It's called Lam Son 719.
We were going to give the South Vietnamese an opportunity to take over their country.
The goal for the ARVN is to weaken the North Vietnamese by cutting off the Ho Chi Minh Trail, one of their army's main supply lines. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is a system of dirt roads traveling through the country of Laos, which by international law bans the U.S. from crossing its borders.
It has to be an ARVN operation, and no Americans, except for helicopter, can cross the border.
The U.S. military's transportation units support and supply the ARVN.
The South Vietnamese Army, the ARVNs, invaded Laos to cut off the Ho Chi Minh supply trail. We supported them to the Laotian border.
Turning the tables on the NVA is not easy.
The roads were flanked with elephant grass, so the enemy could get real close.
On the first night of Lam Son, February 8th, we lost our 3rd Platoon gun truck, the Protector. The gunner, Charles Soule, was killed in that ambush. That was the opening round.
It became increasingly apparent that we were targets. Everything may be peaceful, and then boom!
You don't know when you're gonna get hit. It might be a sniper, it might be a full-out ambush.
Danny Cochran is a .50 caliber gunner on the gun truck King Kong.
Run day and night, 24/7. Military just considered us a truck driver. I don't think a lot of them even recognized what we was doing. We wasn't sitting on the back lines doing nothing. We had a combat out.
I had been a little nervous all day that day.
Intelligence officers warn of an imminent NVA attack. Despite this, the U.S. Army's support convoy leaves as scheduled, escorted by 3 gun trucks. Convoy commander Jim Baird follows in his armored 3¼ ton truck. By midnight, the 2 lead gun trucks deliver half of the convoy to the safety of the base camp. The convoy's final gun truck, Satan's Little Angel, and Lieutenant Baird in his vehicle are with the rest of the convoy when disaster strikes.
But I heard that first explosion, and I knew immediately that we'd been hit.
Satan's Little Angel is hit by a rocket-propelled grenade.
You start to hear some yells and maybe some screams, and somebody got hit, and somebody yelling, "I got hit."
Suddenly, the M60s jam on Baird's truck.
We couldn't move. We were stuck. Taking rounds and small arms fire and just waiting for a grenade.
Lieutenant Baird radios for backup to Uncle Meat and King Kong, the 2 gun trucks already safely at camp.
Jim was on the radio hollering, "Get back here, get back here."
They knew I was in trouble. I said, "I need help." Probably a little louder than that. They said, "Now?" And I said, "Yes."
Hell yeah, right now, get back here.
Uncle Meat and King Kong head straight back into the kill zone.
Don't leave nobody out there. No matter how bad it is, we go back. That's what we do.
The combined firepower of King Kong and Uncle Meat light up the night.
To see that firepower coming out of our old 50s, and putting it back, made you feel pretty good.
King Kong took a RPG and the right rear tires. Shrapnel come through the floor of the bed of the truck and knocked me back. I got back up and kept firing.
10 furious minutes of firing from King Kong and Uncle Meat turns the fight back onto the enemy. They break contact. The ambush is over. Uncle Meat's crew grabbed the wounded from Satan's little angel. They head back to camp with King Kong, following behind towing Baird's disabled truck.
There's no way to describe how it feels to have somebody come back and care about you enough to bring whatever firepower they had. This guy right here, the reason I'm here is because he had the guts and the courage of a gun trucker and those gun truck crews.
There was something that happened in those gun trucks that's hard to explain.
There was a camaraderie there and a survival that was unbelievable. We all had the attitude that all we wanted to do was do our job well, take care of whoever we were supplying supplies to, and then come home and bring everybody we could home. If I called you at 2 o'clock in the morning, anywhere in the world, and I really said I needed you, you'd be there.
Absolutely.
With whatever it took to do the job.
We're
Danny?
brothers.
We got brothers
with different mothers. Definitely.
You know what
Yep,
else we had?
but we're brothers.
Operation Lamb Sun 719 lasts for 1.5 months, with the NVA ambushing the U.S. Army convoys 23 times.
During the Lam San campaign, the only fatalities that we suffered, KIAs, were the gun crews. So we protected the convoy drivers.
Protecting cargo drivers is mission critical for gun truck soldiers. But in November of 1970, this unrelenting determination delivers a devastating blow. Brutus, one of the most feared gun trucks in Vietnam, is in the enemy's crosshairs. The North Vietnamese want Brutus off the road once and for all. The Military Veterans Museum in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, houses one of the largest military vehicle collections in the Midwest. Included in the collection are convoy trucks from the Vietnam War. It is these cargo trucks that bring Vietnam gun truck veteran Roger Blink into the museum to speak with museum president Dave Kirsten.
Roger had mentioned, well, I drove a truck just like this, but it was a gun truck called Brutus in Vietnam. You've heard of gun trucks, right? And unfortunately, my answer was, no, I haven't heard of gun trucks before.
Blink wants to honor the vehicle by building a replica back home.
We were talking about, geez, it would be neat if we could build one, and ultimately I told him, you find a truck, we'll build it for you.
When he said that, I said, done.
There are no plans for a gun truck. We reversed engineered the truck and all of the parts that we needed to build it off of the original photographs.
With the replica of Brutus finally complete, Roger Blink invites 2 former Brutus crew members to visit the truck that helped keep them alive during the war.
Come on in out of the cold, guys. Welcome to the museum.
Thank you.
Vietnam veterans Merton Barrowcliff and Ernie Quintana travel a combined 1,600 miles to visit the newly completed replica.
And let's go see Brutus. Come on, guys. Take a look at her.
That's too pretty for Brutus.
A little cleaner when we were on it, right?
Yeah.
Did a good job rebuilding it. Just as impressive as it was back in the 70s.
Bring back some memories, does it, Mert?
Yeah, 1 or 2.
1 or 2.
The gun trucks in Vietnam is part of my life, and it ain't never gonna go away.
For Quintana, the Brutus replica is a strong reminder of Vietnam and the war that changes his life.
Wow. Being on Brutus was an honor and a privilege. We were a team on that gun truck as well. Everybody had their job to do, and we did it well. It was awesome. It just seems a lot smaller than it did back then.
You were manning the 50s back then, weren't you?
Well, my first weapon of choice was a minigun, and that was because it had such tremendous amount of firepower. You could just feel the pressure coming back on you from the rounds coming out of it. It'd be a ball of fire on the end of that minigun. I went to college after high school, but was more interested in partying rather than studying. So I soon got placed on academic probation, and I received my draft notice shortly thereafter.
In June 1969, 20-year-old Ernie Quintana leaves his hometown of 29 Palms, California, for Vietnam.
It was a long flight, actually the first flight I ever took in my life. And when we landed and the door was open, it was an incredible odor that came in. That was my first impression. But once you're in country, it just becomes part of you. And it's just Vietnam.
Quintana is assigned to the 359th Transportation Unit. The unit's gun truck, Brutus, is one of the baddest trucks in Vietnam.
Destroyed more than any other gun truck in the 359.
Brutus was a prize target. It couldn't be destroyed.
The enemy put a $10,000 reward on Brutus. The VC were calling Brutus the ghost truck because it kept on coming back.
Brutus is built and repeatedly rebuilt after battle by the teams that served on the famed truck. In 1970, Brutus's team consists of crew leader Bill Cagle and a newcomer, Jimmy Ray Callison.
There's always an individual with a big smile, just full of life. And that was Jimmy.
He's a guy you'd want your sister to marry, not so much because you like your sister, but because you want him in your family all the time.
The three young men escort the most dangerous convoys through Vietnam, but their time together wouldn't last long.
You're always ready for the unexpected, and whatever happens, you're prepared to respond.
November 21st, 1970. 5 days before Thanksgiving, Brutus and 6 fuel tankers are trapped in an 800-meter kill zone, as evidenced by these photographs taken during the battle.
As soon as the first gunshots, which were clearly heard and clearly focused on us, was to grab the minigun. As Jimmy was turning the truck into the line of fire, that's when the rocket came into the truck. It just felt like somebody lifted it up and brought it back down. The impact was so powerful, the truck was immobilized.
Even seasoned gun truckers react to this kind of ambush with fear.
We heard Cagle yelling contact on the radio, and you're driving up there to go into a gunfight, you can't even spit. That's how scared you are.
I was catching fire from up to my right, and I couldn't get the minigun to effectively reach that side, so I pushed it as far as I could beyond that optimum range of fire. The belt broke. I remember looking up and seeing the bullets ricocheting off the gun. I'm going, oh my. I needed to get back up on the 50, or else they would come in close, lob in a grenade, and we'd all be done. Started firing, and as I was turning, I took a round and went flying back. I blacked out.
And as we come around the corner, there was Brutus, and then there was Ernie Quintana.
I couldn't hear anything. Everything's like was in slow motion. Finally realized that I had been shot.
Cagle was wounded. He had taken some shrapnel and stuff in the face. He was bleeding pretty good. I looked over down in the driver's compartment at Jimmy, and I knew he was dead right then, but I didn't want to actually think he was.
Fortunately for me and for Bill Cagle, we were able to go back home. Jimmy Callison wasn't as fortunate.
During the ambush, a rocket-propelled grenade lands under the driver's seat, exploding and killing Callison instantly.
He was a wonderful individual. Even after all this time, it just evokes strong memories.
After the devastation of battle, a new crew rises from the barracks. It is led by Richard Bond.
They put me in charge of Brutus, and they asked me who I wanted, and I said, well, I want Chuck Huser and Ron Mowry, because they were two of my best friends, and I knew I could count on them. Ron Mowry, great person, funny. Chuck Huser could be firing an M50 machine gun, be smoking a cigarette, put it in and light it off the one he's smoking and never quit shooting. That guy could smoke.
And rounding out the crew is 21-year-old Larry Dahl.
Larry, he was a goofball, and he liked to have a lot of fun. Loved drinking beer. He was also somebody you could count on.
And just like that, Brutus is back.
Each guy thought his truck was the best truck there was, and I mean, because there's not a doubt Brutus was.
They understood what needed to be done, and they on their own decided, okay, this is the last of Brutus, it'll continue.
That is why the North Vietnamese haven't given up on destroying the famed gun truck. As quickly as Brutus's new crew assembles, they head into battle. On February 23, 1971, Brutus's crew is tasked with escorting a convoy of aviation fuel across deadly territory to a helicopter base. A last-ditch effort by the NVA will transform a young soldier into a national hero.
I'm here with you today to honor a fallen hero and a native son of the great state of Oregon.
In 2016, Clackamas County, Oregon unveils a memorial honoring the heroism of a 21-year-old gun truck soldier who received the United States' highest award, the Medal of Honor. He is one of only 2 men among the thousands who served in the transportation divisions during the Vietnam War to be so honored.
45 years ago was a very long time ago for most of us. But for myself and others from the 359th Trans, the events of 23 February 1971 was like 45 minutes ago.
February 23rd, 1971. 2 fuel convoys are on their way to the U.S. Army's helicopter base in Pleiku, carrying aviation fuel, the most vital and hazardous cargo in all of Vietnam. The first convoy leaves at dawn with 3 gun trucks as protection.
I was supposed to have that day off. When they told me that we were going to escort a convoy of tankers, I go, daggone it. I hate that, because they were the biggest target you'd ever want to see.
3 hours later, the second convoy follows, with convoy commander Fred Carter in the gun jeep, Lil Brutus. In the rear was the Untouchable, with its crew and commander, Filthy Fred Freeman.
One day I pulled up next to Brutus, 3 hours after the rest of them had been in there. Rich Bond walked out, straight out of the shower, his hair slicked back.
He'd come wandering in the mess hall, and he was greased from nose to toes. But I looked at him and I said, man, you look like Filthy Fred Freeman.
And it stuck. And so Filthy Fred was born that day.
Brutus and its new crew, Ron Mowry, Chuck Huser, and Larry Dahl, are in the middle of the convoy. By the end of the day, one of these gun truck soldiers will earn their nation's highest honor. On this day, Hector Diaz replaces Richard Bond as commander of Brutus.
I was getting promoted to E5 Sergeant, and Sergeant Diaz was taking my place that day. Chuck Huser was going to run the radio and the minigun. Larry Dahl was on one of the 50s.
The first convoy slowly heads up the An Khe Pass. Suddenly, enemy fire strikes the lead gun truck.
I could hear them yelling, help, contact, contact.
Once the word got out that these guys were hit, the other gun trucks were racing to get to them.
The Misfits, Brutus, and the Untouchable, escorting the second convoy, race to the aid of their fellow gun trucks.
We were rolling pretty fast when we got to the top of the pass. We could see smoke coming up from a tanker that had been hit.
NVA jumped up out of the ditch and fired a B-40 rocket at me. It's coming at me like a flaming softball.
Fortunately for Deeks, the rocket misses.
I trounced on the brake, and that must have been the difference, because it just kept rising and rising. It went right over top my cab. The Brutus come in, and they had a minigun. And they fired up that area. It was a welcome sight.
You got 6 gun trucks in there. That's a lot of firepower.
Suddenly, the enemy fire ceases. In other ambushes, that signals the end of a battle. This one, unfortunately, would take a tragic turn.
There is a photo, and you can see soldiers standing around, conducting what we would call an after-action view, out there on the kill zone, talking.
They were getting ready to go back to their regular convoy, back down at the bottom on K Pass. Ron was turning Brutus around to go back, and an NVA soldier jumped up and threw a grenade into the back.
They heard that thing bouncing around. The only guy who saw it was Larry Dahl.
Larry yelled grenade.
Then I saw a large amount of grayish smoke come up from there. And that's what a grenade looks like when it, goes off.
Larry jumped on the grenade. He was married and had a child, which most of us didn't. He loved our crew. That's why he did it. We're brothers.
The explosion tosses Chuck Huser and Hector Diaz violently against the walls of the gun truck. Mallory drives out of the kill zone and to the nearest checkpoint to have his crew medevaced out. But it's too late for Dahl.
It hit me pretty hard. Larry was a hero. He gave his life for somebody else. That's what being a hero is.
Larry's sacrifice for his country is why we have coined the 8 or 9 short words that say heroism and valor above and beyond the call of duty. To describe it,
We finally found a photo of Larry Dahl driving the truck looking back, and he's just got that smile on him.
Larry Dahl was from Oregon City, Oregon, the youngest of 4. He joined the Army for the love of his country, but his service overseas meant he'd be leaving behind his wife and his young son, Michael. Michael Dahl doesn't have any memories of his father, but his father's sacrifice inspires his own military service.
Anthony Diaz told me he was born 3 days after my father was killed. And if it had not been for what my father had done, Hector would not have made it home to see his son.
On August 8, 1974, Larry Dahl is posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor by Vice President Gerald Ford. Michael and his mother accept on Dahl's behalf.
And Larry didn't do that for recognition. The recognition Larry'd want today is to be standing there next to his son, Michael. And that's all the recognition he'd want.
I have told my father's story to my own soldiers, not out of hubris, but as a lesson in heritage and heroism and sacrifice. I have told his story to spread a simple message. We may never know when we may be called upon to rise above ourselves and do something truly significant.
Gun trucks are more than vehicles of war. They embody the spirit of their crews.
I never had a brother, but if I had, I couldn't foresee being any closer to a blood brother than I were to these people.
The day that I left that truck, I almost missed the plane because I didn't want to go. And I was a high school dropout and small farm boy, Michigan. That truck was the best thing that ever happened to me.
I left Vietnam, January 30th, 1972. But I didn't want to leave my buddies. I didn't want to leave that truck.
They were the ultimate protectors. Without that, our U.S. casualties could have been much higher.
The gun truck case is a tremendous story about bravery and heroism and identity and brotherhood.
The service and sacrifice of gun truck crews in Vietnam changes military history.
There's a void in Vietnam history, and it's occupied by gun trucks.
Today, American gun truck crews in active war zones carry on the legacy of these legendary Vietnam warriors.
We couldn't have done it without their lessons. We couldn't have done it without what they did. And for us to say anything different, it would be a lie. We are their living legacy.
U.S. Army gun truck crews in Vietnam innovated to accept the challenge of war. Their untold story serves as a striking example of the unbreakable bonds that form through adversity and the strength of the American spirit.